We ready? So the February 17th, 2026 Mount Lebanon Planning Board Commission meeting is now called to order. Do a roll call. Andrew George, absent. Dave Horniak.
Here.
John Schrod here. Paul Ostergaard.
Here.
Matthew Clark.
Here.
From the staff, Josh Scanlon, Gateway.
Here.
Ian McMeans.
Here.
Greg Wharton. Jeff Seeger, our commission liaison, is not present this evening. So, statement on public comments. The planning board will accept public comments with each agenda item. Please note that a repetition of comments made by previous speakers is not necessary for them to be considered. If a group of residents shares an opinion, we suggest that you select a spokesperson. Public comments is not the appropriate time for prolonged debate or for personal comments about or questions directed to fellow residents, the board members, municipal staff, or any developer. In consideration of everyone's time, we encourage residents making public comment to refrain from repeating comments made by previous speakers. For Zoom participants, if you wish to comment during public comment agenda items, use the raise hand function. During the public comment agenda item, the chair will recognize you. When recognized, be sure to unmute your line and announce your name and address for the record. If you have multiple or complicated comments, you are welcome to submit them to us in writing. We ask you to hold your comments to 5 minutes and we'll let you know when your time is up. We appreciate your efforts to be respectful and ask that the audience refrain from any behavior that is disruptive or might intimidate free speech. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the August 19th, 2025 meetings. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of the August 19, 2025 Planning Board meeting.
We have a second?
I second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? There is no old business, so we move to new business. There is a request for preliminary approval and recommendation for final approval of a subdivision plan. Emily and Matthew Upkowski own the neighboring properties at 29 and 33 Carlton Drive. They are proposing the Carlton Manor lot consolidation to combine the .16 acre and .20 acre lots into a single .36 acre lot with a single-family dwelling remaining. The existing dwelling at 29 Carlton Drive will be raised. The lots will be located in the R2 zoning district, and the proposed use will remain a use by right. Is there anyone here to address that, present that, comment on it? Okay. Welcome.
We submitted a request. No, I was just here in the event there are any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Kukowski?
We have an engineer's review letter on this.
Yes. Josh, you have a review?
Yeah, so I have a comment letter dated February 6th, 2026. The single-family attached dwelling, it's a use by right in the zoning district. The remainder of the comments are plan cleanup in nature, some nomenclature updates, and some table updates. And we do have a comment to pick which home is to be demolished as part of the plan. So that's the summary of our comment letter.
Any questions for the engineer? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Are you making?
No.
All right. I'll make a motion to grant preliminary approval and recommend final approval, conditioned upon the applicant addressing items required to be completed prior to final approval noted in the engineer's review letter dated February 6, 2026, and any other comments from the planning board.
Have a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstains? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Kukowski. I said your name correctly, did I? Okay.
So just so you know, the next step in the process, so the planning board granted preliminary approval, recommended final approval. The next step's to go to the commission, the elected officials for the final approval. And then after that, we'll sign the plan, you'll sign the plan, you'll take it down to Allegheny County and record it, because they're the ones that keep the formal records of all the lot lines in the county. And then after you record it, you bring a copy back to us for our records. So the next step's to go to the commission. And so we'll be in touch about when the next commission meeting is. Yep.
Next order of business is the zoning ordinance update. We have our consultant, RJ from OHM.
All right, we're coming up on the screen in a second. So my name is RJ Susko. As John mentioned, I am with OHM Advisors. We're leading the team of consultants that are working on your zoning and SADO update. We have a nice little presentation to give you tonight. I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of you already through the interview process and the steering committee, but for those that I haven't yet, it's great to meet you as well. You will see me a couple times back at the planning board throughout this project as we have a report out of each phase. The fact that I'm here tonight probably tells you that we are at the end of the first phase of the project, and this is our report out. We will be giving the same presentation to the Municipal Commission at their meeting next week as well. So as you can see, there are 4 phases to the project. We are here at the launch phase. We will be rolling next into the longest phase actually of the project, which is the diagnose and draft phase, so the heavy code writing. This is probably you won't see me until, I'd say the fall for the report out of that. But what we're gonna look at tonight are what we've completed so far in the launch phase, phase 1, and we're gonna review the 2 memos that came out of the work in this phase, the plans and policies coordination memo and the public outreach and education plan. And of course, you can see we are at the end of this phase here, task 1.5 today. So unless there are any opening questions about the project, I will roll right into the plans and policies review. Good? Awesome. All right. There we go. So to start off the project, we wanted to make sure that we took a look back at everything that has recently been done in sort of the planning world in Mount Lebanon. The community kind of stands out in the region as one that does a lot of continuous proactive planning, which is nice. That means that we have a good foundation to come in as we do the zoning and SALDO modernization projects. So I've broken them into 3 categories here. The first one are municipal plans, master plans, so your comprehensive plan as well as the main park plan. The second grouping are the plans that relate to Uptown. So Activate Uptown, the strategy document, as well as the design guidelines that I believe is worked on with the Mount Lebanon Partnership. And then the third grouping are documents and policies that are related to TOD, which understandably is quite the theme in your planning process. So what we're going to do is jump into each of these categories. We're going to talk about what we learned when we reviewed each of those and what we'll do with it, because that's really what actually matters for this project. So looking at the municipal master plans first, what we learned, this was a big theme of the resilience chapter in your comp plan. Is that a modernized zoning ordinance can enable reinvestment, promote resilience, and also should make sure that it protects that historic neighborhood character that residents in the community really value about Mount Lebanon. So, some of the things that are discussed in the comp plan are incremental evolution. Gentle density is the planning jargon that we use for those techniques, but, allowing the community to evolve gracefully and reasonable use of property while also still making sure that the DNA remains the same. So how we're hoping to get there throughout this project is looking at, for example, permitted housing types, infill standards, requirements to make sure that there is context-sensitive reinvestment. Again, this is something that we heard talking to staff, talking to officials, that being able to make reasonable reinvestments in property is a really significant value driver for the municipality. It keeps the revenue coming in so that we can have all the nice things that we do. So making sure that that reinvestment is context sensitive and keeps the DNA the same is very important. We're also going to be looking at incorporating flexibility mechanisms that really prioritize community vision. This is an exercise that we recently did at the steering committee kickoff, which we'll talk about it a little bit further in the presentation, but understanding what the regulatory goals of this project are, what the outcomes are that we want to see in the code. And vision-driven with flexibility is the tagline that has been identified for this project. So what that looks like is, with a built-out community, you're not going to get to the point where you're reinventing the wheel and remaster planning everything, but there is going to be some evolution over time, and the vision that you have set forth in your comprehensive plan, as well as some of your other planning documents and policies, is really going to be the driver for that, building in flexibility mechanisms to make reasonable concessions for sites that overall enhance the community's vision and bring overall community benefit. When those, infrequent, but still, there may be some redevelopment projects that come across your desks. We want to make sure that you have options to get the best result for the community. And making sure that we also calibrate design standards for green infrastructure, best practices when it comes to managing stormwater. LIBO is green. That's a pretty core tenet of your planning processes, and so that also featured quite prominently in the comprehensive plan. We want to make sure that we dial those in as we're doing this update. Moving on to Uptown. Speaking of community DNA, this one's kind of just what it does. It does what it says on the tin, right? Uptown is your historic Main Street district, and so that form and that pedestrian-oriented character is really what makes Uptown, what it is and what it has been for quite some time. And so making sure that the design standards that apply to that area reflect how Uptown already functions. It's not something that you're looking to radically change. It's something that you're looking to take care of, again, enable reinvestment and make sure that, these regulations enhance the good stuff that's already there, because having a lively street environment, pedestrian experience, that's really essential to the community's economic vitality. So we want to make sure that that keeps rolling. So what we'll do in this project is we'll take a look at, particularly, and this was something that I think came forth in the Uptown design guidelines, is making sure that the lot coverage and the setback requirements align with what's already there, because if there is redevelopment, you don't want something that's radically different. You want something that matches the existing character. Also making sure that we analyze the design guidelines for consistency with the existing Art Deco and modern architectural stock. That is another feature that people really love, and so we want to make sure that anything new matches as well as it can. And sign regulations, this one's pretty common, honestly, for anyone that's doing a zoning ordinance update right now. They usually just need an overhaul. A lot of things have changed in the last 20 or so years. And so there were some recommendations. The Uptown design guidelines had already done a bit of legwork on what the character and what the scale is of Uptown, what's appropriate for sign regulations. So we're going to take those, sort of marry those with our model sign ordinance best practices to make sure that everything matches the scale and character, but also is defensible and meets all of the latest court decisions that are always coming down when somebody gets in a fight about a sign. And the last grouping here is transit-oriented development. So what we learned, again, not really a shocker, but station areas are a pretty important piece of the character of Mount Lebanon, and they're really intended, especially in the PRT guidelines, they've made a pretty solid statement about this. They're intended to function as walkable neighborhoods first. So not just something that's car-oriented or for park and ride convenience. That's certainly part of what goes into TOD is sort of having that customer capture for those that do come in and use the stations as primarily transit rather than walkable features of their own neighborhood. But that doesn't mean that they're supposed to exist to serve the vehicles and the car users. So street design and planning should prioritize that multimodal access throughout everything that we do. And we're also going to touch on the active transportation plan team a little bit later, but that's something that we're hearing loud and clear in when we've interfaced with them so far. So part of what we'll do is reviewing those district standards again near the transit station to make sure that the uses, the density, that all of those things are aligned with TOD best practices for the character of the neighborhoods that you have around the stations, and integrating those complete streets principles and the policies that you already have into your SALDO particularly, because that's what impacts street design, public realm design. So that was a speed run of your existing plans and policies, but before I launch into the public outreach, is there anything that you all would like to ask or touch upon?
I wear two hats. I'm also on the partnership board.
Yes.
And they're most excited to meet with you. They've been pursuing some, I think they feel very important ideas for a number of years now, and we look forward to sharing.
Stay tuned. Next section. They come up a couple times, but that's good to know. I mean, I saw a lot of the care that went into the Uptown design guidelines.
Yeah.
It's good to have an ally on the ground, so, yeah. Anything else? Cool. All right, let's talk about how we're actually going to be talking to people. So the public outreach plan, and I've got, Ian, were these in all of your packets? Okay, great. So you have the full document, but here are a couple pages that you can, for the viewers at home, that you can see a preview of what this document looks like. So this is really our roadmap for the rest of the project that's going to take us through, I believe it's March or April of 2027. So this is organized around 4 stakeholder groups: the municipality, public, the business and development community, and planning partners. And so what we're going to do on these next couple slides is dive into each of those groups, talk a bit about how we're going to, perform the outreach with them, and then we're going to go phase by phase and talk about what each of those phases are meant to do, how everybody plugs in during each of those. So the way that these are set up is we talk about the people and the groups that we're interfacing with, what we're going to do with outreach and the conversations that we're going to have. And then, because education was emphasized as a really important part of this project, when the request for proposal was put out, we are going to call out what the educational component is for each of the groups that we're going to be engaging with. So this slide's been up for a minute, so you've probably read already that the municipality is here. Elected officials, municipal staff, and the advisory boards and liaisons that make the wheels turn. We're going to have workshops. We've already had the one with the steering committee to lay out the regulatory goals of the project. Like I mentioned, that vision-driven approach, that was what we achieved through the initial kickoff work with staff and the steering committee. And overall, these groups are going to be providing strategic guidance throughout the project to make sure that the ordinance that comes out of the process advances the community planning goals that were set forth in the comprehensive plan, as well as those other plans that we reviewed. And the educational component is, as we reach sort of the midpoint of phase 3 into the end of the project in phase 4, we're going to be providing training on administration of the new code, making sure that everybody knows what's where, what their responsibility is, as each board, staff member, official. Makes for a much more seamless transition when you're not sitting at your first planning commission meeting with a development application, flipping through the thing, trying to find where everything moved to. Not that much is going to move, but we're going to do a little bit of reorganization. So that's going to be the big educational component with the municipality. On the public side, this is everybody who lives, works, and participates in the Mount Lebanon community. I think, as you're probably all aware, Mount Lebanon is considered a destination as much as it is a neighborhood that people live in. And so I'm sure that we're going to see, whether they're residents, business owners, or just people that like to hang out at one of your multiple breweries on the weekend, me, coming down to do some of the outreach activities, especially as we get rolling into phase 3. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing when we're working with the public is, you've already done really rich engagement through your comprehensive plan and the other plans that we discussed. And so we want to be mindful of not being redundant. We want to be mindful of not creating engagement fatigue when you do still need that attention to ask, from the public to ask what they'd like, and other planning efforts that probably are going to continue to go on other than this project. So we have really good, a really good foundation from the comp plan. So we're really going to be focusing on community events, communications that explain, what is changing about the code? What does this mean for you day to day? What does this change about what you can do on your property? And making sure that we connect those prior engagement outcomes to what is happening in this project so people can see the life cycle of proactive planning. On the related...
Okay, do you have,
yes.
Examples of what groups you're going to be meeting with in terms of community engagement?
Yeah, so we actually, it's like this next point, so well-timed, but the main groups that we have specific structured engagement plan for are the Mount Lebanon Partnership, local business stakeholders. I believe we have a focus group also that we're going to be pulling together for liaisons from each of the advisory boards and statutory authorities, and then real estate stakeholders as to be determined by municipal officials as we move into these focus groups that are going to be coming up in the next month and a half or so.
Will there be a website or a link to the municipality's website that shows progress and things like that?
Yes, yeah. So we'll jump into that a little bit more when we're talking about the phase 1 activities, but in brief, We're calling it the Online Zoning Hub, which is, I believe, Ian, correct me if I get this wrong, you're going to be adding a page to the municipal website that collects different information about current zoning information, as well as we have a little zoning map that we're going to use to show some of the existing character, and that as the project goes on, we can show if there are changes to the zoning district, sort of the before, after, and how that impacts the zoning. So there may be other things added along the way, but there are a few different options that we have in a public participation toolbox that are optional. It just kind of depends on how the project evolves, what people need, what ultimately the municipality decides to deploy. But we can talk a little bit more about those as we get into the phases. But this particular group, businesses and developers, this is one of the ones where we have that active conversation with them. We're looking at roundtable sessions coming up, as I mentioned, about the next month and a half or so, pretty early on, so that we can make sure that we're grounding the recommendations that we make throughout this project in local context. Because it's one thing to be able to say this is the most technically correct answer, but it's another to actually understand how that works on the ground and what people really are experiencing and care about. So we want to make sure that we're interfacing early on. And the educational component for this group, the end result is going to be, we want to make sure that, among other things, that this code is user-friendly, that it's accessible to a lot of different user groups, whether that be regular residents just trying to put an addition on their house, or somebody that's looking to do some serious, real estate development in those couple remaining parcels you have. So ultimately, more effectively being able to communicate opportunity for reinvestment will be the educational component for this one. As well as these groups are going to be invited to any of the community events that we hold to, get a first look at some of the same things that we're going to be demoing for residents. Last group, planning partners. So this is just kind of a catch-all bucket for the existing and ongoing plans that you have right now, the active transportation plan team, the South Parking Garage feasibility study, and Allegheny County Economic Development, AKA ACED. We've actually already had a meeting with the active transportation team to make sure that we get on the calendar when their recommendations are rolling out, which I believe is supposed to be in May. So that's one of those project milestones that we'll make sure to re-engage with them, share progress updates, understand what the other teams are recommending so we can integrate that into the final product. And for this education piece, it's actually education for us because we'll be learning from those teams and hearing from ACD when they do their advisory review, what their thoughts are in the new code and what they think should be integrated so we can pull it all together at the end. So those are the 4 big buckets, but before I hit the individual phases, do we have any questions about the stakeholder groups?
I don't know how well organized Beverly Road is, but I think that's certainly a group of businesses that think together as an entity. And I would hope that you'd have some connection, develop some sort of connection with that group as well. And also possibly Castle Shannon Boulevard, Stock Road, that little business district.
Hitchhiker.
Yeah.
See, I know your places by the breweries. Yeah, for sure. Ian, do you have any particular thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a Beverly Road Merchants Association that we can tap into. They're the ones that kind of help plan the Beverly Bright Night every year. So Eric Milliron, our commercial districts manager, is also part of the municipal staff team for the zoning project. So Castle Shannon Boulevard is less organized than Beverly or Uptown, but we might be able to find a couple people down there that are willing to at least come out for a meeting. And just to add on to what RJ had said before, the website the page on the municipal website is in draft form right now. I basically just have to finish going through it, check it for typos and all that, and then we'll launch it. So should be launching soon.
Yep. We're pulling together the map component, the map lookup component for the online zoning hub right now. So probably that will launch about the beginning of next month, I'm thinking. I mean, we'll coordinate with Ian further, but that's the plan.
And then I assume you're going to be planning to meet with certain key stakeholders, important institutions in the community that might have future expansion plans, changes, and people who own fairly large chunks of property.
Yeah.
That could be redeveloped. Do you have provisions for
Yes.
reaching out to those people?
So if we hop back to this group right here, businesses and developers, I mean, this is kind of just a big catch-all bucket, but we have 3 focus groups. And like I said, not exact dates or attendees scheduled yet, but like mentioning the Beverly Road Association, because we have the separate focus group specifically for Mount Lebanon Partnership. But Beverly Road, we've also mentioned the hospital, that came up with the steering committee. You're working on the full list for the real estate, yeah. But I mean, if there are any particular suggestions, like I would welcome them.
Scott Road, or, yeah, there's a big study going on there. I don't know anything about it, but, you know, it's one of those places that is in flux.
Got it, okay. Yeah, that's something that I just put on our list for within the next week or two. We want to nail down like who the exact attendee list is. So if there's any other thoughts you all have, maybe shoot Ian an email and he'll make sure he quarterbacks it over to me and we can confer to get all the right people in the room. Cool.
This may be a question for Ian, but so you're going to present to the Planning Commission at the end of each phase, right? Are we publicizing to the community that this will occur so that they have an opportunity to attend the Planning Commission meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the webpage is gonna have like a draft schedule on it, so those dates will be on there. And the planning board meeting agendas are public and all that too. So if people are signed up for LIBO alerts, if you get the meeting notifications, there are LIBO alerts that get sent out when there is a planning board meeting coming up, and you can check the website for agendas. So they're published in multiple ways, yeah.
All good? All right. Home stretch. So we're going to be looking quickly at each of the phases, and you can see on each of these slides, there's the page from the public outreach plan that's pulled out. I don't expect anyone can read this, but that's why you have the full document available.
And just so the board members know, I shot an email out to all of you that has the PDFs of the outreach plan and the coordination memo, just in case it slipped through the cracks somewhere, just so everybody has it again in one place.
Awesome. So we're going to hit each of the 4 phases on these before we wrap up. But phase 1, this is mostly a retrospective at this point, because as you saw, we're on the last task of phase 1. But the theme of this one has been municipal groundwork, making sure that we're setting the stage for a successful project by talking to all of the internal stakeholders, making sure that we learned about all of those prior planning and engagement efforts, so we're not reinventing the wheel that already is turning quite nicely. And that online zoning hub that we have been discussing will be launching at the end of this phase to wrap it up, and let people know that we are working away behind the scenes through phase 2, which is the drafting phase. So the theme of at least the first chunk of phase 2, the diagnose half of diagnose and draft, is about building context. So this is where those roundtable sessions that we've been talking about come in, making sure that we get that context as we're going into the full diagnostic report and audit, which will be a workshop that we'll come back to the steering committee with before we really get rocking on writing that code. So you will not see us that much on the public side during the heavy drafting phase, because we actually want to be able to have something to share with the public before we're coming back. But, if there are questions during that drafting phase, we have options to, roll out a blog update on the online zoning hub, or, we can work to make coming soon materials and things like that while we're doing the heavy code lifting. But throughout that process, we've broken the process into 7 modules, roughly about a month each. And every other module completion, we will come back to the steering committee for, again, that strategic guidance, making sure we're on the right track, and that what we've laid the groundwork for in that regulatory goals workshop and the diagnostic report workshop is being reflected in the draft code. We'll also be working pretty closely with staff throughout that. But as we arrive towards the fall, late summer, that's when you'll start seeing some of those wrap-up activities that will build excitement for phase 3's public engagement and education campaign, which is really the meat and potatoes of that whole thing. At the end of phase 2, I fully admit I may have just wanted to do a podcast, which is why we put this in the proposal, but we do, for example, have a special edition of Inside LIBO planned, where we will get the word out for whatever the precise public education engagement campaign activities are at that point, to let people know what's coming down the pike. But what we do know we're doing for sure is a community open house that will connect the new code concepts to what was decided from the public engagement of the comprehensive plan. Am I allowed to say the date yet, or are the wheels still turning on that one?
Not yet.
Okay.
Soon.
We think we have something very fun planned, but more to come. But you'll see that towards the end of the year. There may also be some other optional placemaking opportunities that are in that public participation menu that can be deployed according to the project needs. So that might look like a scavenger hunt in Uptown to learn about different features that go into placemaking. Or a zoning night out where if there's something that people really want to know about, you can call me in and I'll do a fun seminar. I will force people to have fun with zoning. I'm told I'm very good at that. But no, I mean, it's making sure that we break down those concepts into something that actually matters to people's day-to-day lives. We were talking to municipal manager Keith at the kickoff for the steering committee about, how there's the sort of local government school. I don't remember the exact name of the program, but sort of like that Citizens Academy, right? And that as part of that programming, you always think about how do we make this matter to people's day-to-day lives? So we were chatting about how can we, translate some really, really wonky code stuff into real things that people see around them. I have done podcasts about that, so I'm ready to rock. But one of the other things I want to highlight in this phase is the training workshop that we'll be holding for the advisory boards and statutory authorities to make sure that everyone that is involved in the development review process gets that hands-on learning opportunity of how all of the things come together so that they're ready to rock when this thing is finally adopted. And then phase 4 is technically called adoption in the plan, but I'm calling it celebrate. Told you I was going to bully you into having fun with zoning. But so this phase kind of marries the statutory processes that have to happen to legally adopt a new zoning code with community celebration. Sharing out with people what they can do with their property that, maybe is a new and exciting opportunity. Accessory dwelling units, we don't know what we're going to do with those yet, but maybe that's an example of something that we would debut, at this wrap party, the second open house. Urban chickens, can you do them? We also don't know that yet, but that was something that was in the comp plan. Those are the things that people usually get real wound up about when it comes to their own properties. But what else might be enabled for the business and development community? At the end of the day, like we were just saying with that Citizens Academy, it is really, zoning can be a very abstract thing. It's a bunch of words that live on a page and hopefully with some pretty pictures if we do it well, right? But it's something that, you have to have some technical skill to approach the task. It's not like you can open up a Word document and just start typing and you've got a law that works, right? But there are a lot of ways to have conversations about how these things have real impacts, the way that your community is built up around you or maintained around you. What that means for you growing up, what that means for you growing old, what that means for your experience of bringing friends to your community. These are all things that are directly influenced and really built by a good zoning code, hopefully a good zoning code. So that's going to be an opportunity to share those out with the community. And then the project will wrap up with the final public hearing for adoption and document delivery and any other educational tools that the municipality may choose as part of that optional menu. And in summation, I look forward to celebrating with you in 2027, partially because I'll be really excited that I'm done writing like 150 pages of code, but also partially because I just think this is really awesome. This is going to be a really great thing for the community. You planned very well to get there. So, with that said, more Q&A if you would like it. Happy to answer any questions about the plan or anything else we've gone over tonight.
One of the challenges of our zoning code is its organization. It's a little difficult to find things. If I recall correctly, and I could be wrong, there's no real use chart in the zoning ordinance.
And there will be one. That's non-optional.
It's hard to find the signage section of the code. It's hard to find any illustrations. You have to go into an appendix. So will there be a point in the process where you will have a preliminary, at least, table of contents and organization?
It's a wonderful question, because the answer is yes. That is the next thing that we're working on.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's what we always start with, because you need to know where you're going to get there. So there are some general best practice standards for organizing a modern code, putting all of the uses in one section with a chart. Putting all of the districts, each of them getting sort of their own subchapter, but that will be its own, part, article, whatever it is exactly. I think it's called part in this code. Administrative stuff all lands in one spot. Supplemental regulations, maybe a use-specific regulation or something that applies to all districts, like allowed projections for bay windows, those land in a supplemental regulation part. And then you have a few other things, like I think a floodplain ordinance, stuff like that, that tends to just get its own part. There's not really you have to put it here or there. It's just working well already. Design standards, same thing. Signs typically get their own part as well, because from my experience administering a permit shop for several years, I understand that probably about 50% of your counter customers really just want to know what they can do with their sign. So it's good to kind of let that one smack you in the face when you open up the code. So at the next steering committee meeting, the workshop that we will be doing is to go over that diagnostic report and preliminary table of contents.
And then the saldo is, it's not the same as the zoning code, but
They're friends.
right next to each other.
Yes.
They're friends.
Yeah. So, and we've talked about this a bit, not to get too wonky. I'll try to make it, not too in the weeds here, but the shorthand is looking at particularly Pennsylvania zoning, the way that state planning law enables zoning versus site development standards. Whether you put one in your zoning code versus whether you put a standard in your saldo kind of determines who gets the approval, the review process for a variance. Zoning goes to zoning hearing board. If somebody wants a design modification in the saldo, they can come to this body and then have it approved by the municipal commission. So understanding that vision-driven with flexibility aspect is really key in understanding what lands in which section of the code. The saldo is usually pretty straightforward in terms of organization. They probably won't have to move much around there. The real reorganization is going to come on the zoning ordinance side, but understanding what maybe we don't want to live in the zoning ordinance anymore and move into the saldo to achieve those regulatory goals, that's also what we're looking through right now.
You just start with the Pennsylvania MPC and work your way from there, or when you talk about building the new code?
Yeah, so we have basically some starting points of best practices for language that is defensible and plain. I don't mean that as in boring, but like you can read it, and it seems like something you can read instead of the these, thous, and wherefores. We try to strip as much of that legalese from it as we can. It doesn't really do that much for you at the end of the day. So what the MPC lays out essentially what you're allowed to regulate in your code, but it doesn't really give you a mandated structure for how you compose that. So we use sort of just best practice standards to put that table of contents together and move things around. I don't think that there's anything that we've seen so far that shouldn't be in a zoning code per the MPC. So you're looking pretty good on that front.
So, when I look and you talk about enable reinvestment, and I was on the zoning hearing board for many years. One of the things that we had, obviously, were just a lot of variance requests. Have you looked at the history of variance requests here to see what are the pain points here in Mount Lebanon?
Yeah, so I'm smiling because what arrived in my inbox this morning was your history of the last several years, your variance requests. So that's part of the diagnostic process, is understanding what those pain points are. So as we go through and do the full close read in the code audit, we know what we're looking for in regards to at least those particular things.
Sure. I mean, and some stuff isn't obvious, like your house is right next to a paper street that we're never going to develop, yet you're bound by, you're a corner house, even though you're next to a paper street. That's not necessarily obvious in that zoning request, the variance
Is
request.
there anything off the top of your head from that experience that you were like, oh, we gotta fix?
Well, paper streets.
Paper streets, okay. That one's a little bit, it's got a weird state code attached to it, so I'll have to see how those landed in the actual cases, but duly noted, because yes, they are always the strangest thing to explain.
We had a lot of fencing requests for corner lots, especially on busy streets.
Okay.
Especially because the way it's structured, any side facing a street is a front lot and you can't put your fence there.
Right.
And so people can't put a fence in their backyard because it's facing the street. And we had a lot of requests like that. They're like, my kids are going to run out into the street because you're on Bower Hill, right? But the way the code reads, you can't.
What did you usually grant?
Well, we would deny them, and then people would move, right?
Okay.
And that's the issue. When we talk about enabling reinvestment, people are like, look, if I can't put a fence here with my kids, I don't feel safe here, and we will move.
So what I'm hearing is denial of a case doesn't necessarily indicate that that's not a standard you wanted to see.
Well, we, as the zoning hearing board, were looking at the code and whether it met the 5 variance requirements, right? And if it did, great, and if it didn't, we were kind of had our hands tied. So there were a number of cases where, the heart in me says we should grant this,
Yeah,
but looking at the law as written and the 5 requirements, and you're not meeting the 5 requirements, we couldn't. And so therefore, we were denying things. And I know that people would move after they were denied.
well, this is really good context, because some communities that are working under an older code will see that same thing happening, where you get the same requests over and over, and eventually they just start approving them because everybody agrees that they're fine. And that can usually be a flag for, oh, we should just put this in the zoning code. But if what I'm hearing is a denial doesn't necessarily reflect, like that you were correctly administering the hardship criteria. So a denial doesn't necessarily reflect community preference, but it does reflect the reality of the hardship in the code on the lot. So maybe, Ian, that's something we can dig into a little bit more once I start doing the history review, or, marking what are the ones that sounded like everyone was fine with them, but realistically, they just didn't cross the bar. That would be good to know.
It was like sidewalks, fences, number of parking spaces. You can't remove a parking space. You can't remove a garage without replacing it. People want to, expand their homes, but the only place to expand it is where the garage exists. And then so they were having to replace a garage that they didn't need, things like that. Auxiliary structures, people are putting more and more type things like that in their properties. Like I said, paper streets. One that struck me was something that was already non-conforming, and it was moving to something that was less non-conforming. But we were still having an issue with it because it is still non-conforming. And the variance requirements, when you read them strictly, don't give you that flexibility. Because you're looking at lot unusual characteristics, and say it's a sign ordinance, that's a great example. Who cares what your lot is like? We're talking about a sign.
Right.
And it would be really hard, I think, to get a variance on a sign because the requirement is looking at the unusual characteristics of a lot.
Right.
And those are very different things. So just things like that where maybe you're not, maybe you either change the code to make it more, residence friendly based on the requester coming up. Or maybe you give that sort of flexibility to the zoning board, specifically in the code, that says, in some of these areas, you have additional discretion to grant a variance that you may not have otherwise. And of course, then you have to look at how that.
I mean, that would turn into a special exception, I think, rather than a variance, because then the criteria are not quite as stringent. But something that we've seen particularly with, for example, that nonconformity case, we could, it depends on ultimately what everyone's comfortable with, but you could use language like, as long as you're not increasing the degree of nonconformity, you can modify a nonconforming structure. That's something that in my past life on the public side, that worked really well for people that just wanted to extend along an existing non-conforming setback, or in your example, repair and shrink, So, I mean, when we do the administrative chapter, which comes up fairly quick, we'll hit all of those, but that's really good context for that.
And then, the key of those is, those are residents that have already had an issue with it. And you can look at the opinions and see, and say, hey, what could we change here that might have given the flexibility for the resident to get what they were wanting without, violating the code, or maybe granting a variance that shouldn't have been granted.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Ian, but I've modified your homework. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind for that historical list, just marking up the ones that are like, this would probably have been acceptable, but our hands were tied by the current code, that would be super helpful.
We'll see what we can do, yeah. Greg is putting it all into a spreadsheet, so, yep.
Perfect. Anyone else? All right. Well, I had a thank you slide, but it's gone. So in theory, thank you for having me. Like I said, I'll be back at this body probably in about 7-8 months to do the report out of the first draft of the code. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, reach out to Ian. I'd be happy to get you an answer.
Thank you, RJ.
Thank you.
That moves to the citizen comment portion of the meeting. There is no one signed up, but sir, do you have comments for the Commission? Absolutely.
Subdivision and land development. That's also very long. The point taken.
Yes. Thank you, sir. As there are no other comments, the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Mount Lebanon Planning Board, is there one online? Anyone on Zoom want to make a comment?
Raise your hand on Zoom if you'd like to make a comment. I guess not. Okay.
Seeing none, the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Mount Lebanon Planning Board is Tuesday, March 17th, 2026 at 7 p.m. All municipal meetings do have a Zoom webinar component to enable residents to attend meetings either virtually or in person. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.